We're going to go ahead and get rolling. I'm Louis Slimak, Director of Academic Excellence and Assessment in the Provost's office. I'm the assessment guy. I'm all things,
We love you.
And people tolerate me anyway. So I would say tolerate. I don't know about like. I have been academic integrity liaison thing until recently because I'll let my partner introduce.
Azalea Holbert. I'm the new Director of Academic Integrity in the Provost Office and Student Conduct.
So tears of joy that we have someone here for this. And we'll be kind of co-presenting back and forth today, talk about what we saw last year, what some of the data indicates, where we need to work on, improve, what Azalea's plans are for that. And I'll be slowly fading into just more assessment-y things in this case. If you've got any questions, as usual, just shout out as we go. It's not formal. Just yell at us. We can talk about whatever you see.
There is a microphone to yell into, though,
Yes.
because we are recording this for others. I don't know where it went, but
Amy's got it?
over there.
Even if we speak really loud, we have to use the mic.
Even if you speak really loud, you must use the microphone. See, now I have to repeat what you say if you don't otherwise, Janet. And I can call you out by name. So the first graph is just to kind of show you where the institution has been over time. When I started in 16, we had the lowest reporting in a long time. At that point, I've made this joke a lot. You had to like fill out forms in triplicate, send them out on carrier pigeons, pray to God, like some volcanic deity recognized it, sent it back to you, and then maybe something happened, but you never found out what happened or where it went, and the process was horrifying. And I complained about how horrifying the process was, and so it fell to me to fix. We doubled that reporting in 16-17, and we more than doubled that in 17-18, which is great. It's hard to be excited about all the academic dishonesty, like, yay! But I am. I'm glad that we've got that up. The amazing thing about that, as we'll see, is there are giant chunks out there that we aren't reporting, large departments where we know lots of freshmen sit. So odds are there's something happening there. Entire colleges that are mysteriously absent from the reporting. So we are probably going to grow another 50 to 100% would be my guess.
Yep, that's the plan.
Yeah. Which again, we're super excited about, but you know, students maybe not so much.
But see, we know it's already happening, so we just want to know about it. That's what we're excited about.
Yeah.
Is knowing what's happening under the surface.
And I think, as with anything, when you first take that look, you're not sure what you're going to find. I used to live on the ocean. I would dig my hands in and grab things out of the tide pools. And every so often I thought I had grabbed something small, and then you'd pull out and realize, oh, no, it was much bigger and more exciting than you. I think that was the case here, is that, oh, we know there's cheating. How much cheating? And you kick the rock, you're like, well, it's got lots of tentacles, right? There were 26 repeat offenders within the academic year alone. One of the things we'll talk about later, and one of the things that Azalea is focusing on and that we have started already doing more of, is addressing repeat offenders. It has been spotty at best in the past, and having 26 repeat offenders in one academic year alone is a high number. When you look at those kids, they're often multiple offenders, not like twice in one academic year, but 3 and 4 times in one academic year. And we'll be addressing that in policy and hopefully in data. And then there were 51 violations from online courses. One of the things you talked about was determining whether those are online program students or just online sections. And I didn't analyze the data that way, so all I can tell you is they were online sections, but not whether that was part of an online program or not. It looked online section-y, though, didn't it?
I think it was online sections, but the reason that we were talking about kind of figuring out that distinction is because typically in the online programs, you're going to have more non-traditional students who might have different pressures, full-time jobs, family obligations that they're dealing with versus 18 to 22-year-olds who are in an online section of a class who are doing it for expediency or because it's easier to do their assignments on their own, if we're being cynical about it. So that's just one of the things that I want to drill down into as I keep collecting this data and getting even better data on who these students are that are committing these violations and what might be motivating them and how we can address that.
I just tracked online to see if we were reporting anything from online. We have a certain percentage of online courses and students. Hopefully those courses we're reporting. So we'll dig more into that as we go. It's one of those areas for improvement. So now we can start, I don't know, shaming or saying hooray for people. These are reports by department.
Can I ask, wherever the microphone is?
Yeah, I'll come and get it.
Is that undergraduate and graduate?
Yes, it is.
Yes, that is
Yes.
both undergraduate
So
and
is there,
graduate.
Like at some point, do you separate those two categories just out of curiosity?
I'll show you the data by level here shortly.
Okay.
Graduate was so small in general that it wasn't worth teasing out. Tricia Phillips, who is a faculty fellow at the Provost's office, and I are working on research integrity and graduate academic dishonesty, and trying to tease out what those overlaps are and kind of, again, bolster awareness and reporting and understanding institutionally of that. So there will be a separate effort around graduate kinds of issues soon. But in terms of what we just collected in terms of reporting, it was, I want to say 17, we'll see here in a second, but for all of grad courses, it was like 17. It was very small. So this is just everybody, mostly undergrad. You can see that math, psych, computer science had large reports, so did chemistry. The thing about fundamentals of engineering is it's not a big program. You guys were right up there, way to go. Yeah, we'll cheer for engineering 101 and 102. But then you see, all others were kind of in the middle there, but some of those big departments, like English, which has all the freshmen in it, 19 is not the number of plagiarists in English 101 and 102. I've talked to Tom Sura and Sarah Morris, and we'll be continuing that conversation. They're staffed a lot by GTAs. That's a different problem, right? And so it becomes then educating them, educating the students, and they do revisions, and there are reasons that it might be lower than expected, but not that low. And then we had things like giant collusive events where 50 million people would work together to use Apple Watches to cheat on a test that ballooned numbers in math, chemistry, and nursing. So it's hard to tell if this is an actual baseline. But again, for a first-year data report, we're kind of just seeing where we are. If you don't see your department on there, get on there. Like we want to say good job for reporting academic dishonesty. Anything more to say about that one?
Nope, I think
No.
you covered it.
That one's easy. Yeah, this was fun. A different way to look at that same data, right? Where you're like, yeah, Everly, holy cow, and Statler. So by college, it's really low in some other places again, and you can see B&E, nursing, which had a big event, but other colleges that just didn't report.
Yes, I mean, we had some that maybe had a couple of reports, but when you think about, this was 440 reports, but when you think about the number of students we have multiplied by the number of classes each one of them is in, 440 is barely scratching the surface, and so for some colleges to report 0 or to report 2 or 3, that's, they're not even scratching the surface. And I know some, like law, they report internally to an administrator there, and so the information is tracked, but it's just not necessarily coming through on these reports that we're collecting through the academic dishonesty form. So it's very possible that in a lot of cases, faculty are just handling it internally or reporting it to someone else. And if you know that's happening in your college, please, please encourage them to report the official way so that we can just really have a good sense, not only of where it's happening, but what kind of things are happening in each college, so that we can better tailor approaches to educating students, educating faculty, putting safeguards in place like Eberly has done to deal with some of those large collusive events. There are things that we can do as a university to help with these issues if we know what the issues are. So,
Well, the
again,
reporting helped us to realize they were doing, it's the same students.
yes, absolutely. And as you mentioned,
Math
we'll-
and chem have math, chem, and engineering. There's kind of this
Yes.
perfect Bermuda Triangle of badness.
and a lot of the multiple offenses that we had were math and chemistry or chemistry and engineering. And so some of those safeguards, it actually will be interesting to see if the numbers do double this year, although they should. But if some of
Because-
those large collusive events don't happen, we're going to
dips
have
a
to
bit.
rely on other colleges that aren't currently reporting to report a lot more. So it'll be interesting to see how the data shakes out this year.
Did you look at the data broken down by students major?
I
You say a lot of
yes.
Cyberleys would be engineering
I have started to do that, yes. That was not something that Lou tracked.
I didn't, right.
Because he's one human being and has other things to do. But I have started looking at that, yes.
Yeah.
What are the, and I'll say both, I'll ask it both ways, what are the incentives and what are the requirements for departments and colleges to report?
I'll talk about what was the past, and I'll let Azalea answer for the future.
Okay.
In the past, there were no requirements. It is, university policy to report, but because there was no dedicated unit, and because it was something I took on to improve understanding of, I wasn't going to funnel back to a unit, a department, a college even, and be like, "Hey, you're out of line." Like it was an additional thing that I cared about that I took on. So there was no punitive measures to get anybody to do it. The incentive is to understand your population. Math, chemistry, and engineering had a problem, and this has started to help them address that problem. We've moved to testing in common sections with assigned seats, with kinds of these best protocols for math and chem. We're hoping that reduces some of the testing events and collusion in those situations, because you won't be sitting by someone you picked or know. So we'll see if that works. But that lets us, again, and the provost's office backed that initiative, did some of the work. So it lets us then leverage different resources. So that was the incentive. It's like, hey, you've probably got this going on. If you have a problem and we know what the problem is, the incentive is we can tell you what the problem is and help you fix it. Which is just, that's the assessment angle on it, right? Let's improve based on what we know. Moving forward.
Yes. So for me, one of the big incentives for faculty moving forward is simply knowing that something's going to happen. I mean, you referenced earlier that a lot of times faculty with the older system didn't know what in the world happened when misconduct was reported. And that's not unique to WVU. That happens everywhere. Faculty don't go through the required or suggested process because it's cumbersome, because it's a black hole that their report goes into. But one of the process pieces that I'm looking to improve is what happens with multiple offenses, which hopefully will give faculty the confidence to know that they can focus on the classroom piece of whatever happened. They can report that, and then if the student has a larger behavioral problem, something more will happen, whether that's educational or something more punitive like suspension, probation, things like that, to help address that behavioral piece. And so I think that's going to become an incentive, just because faculty can do the process trusting that it will actually result in something where they're not going to have to worry about this student again, so they don't feel like they have to necessarily throw the book at the student personally. They can just address the classroom behavior in an appropriate way and let the process work. So that's my hope, that we'll incentivize this without standing over people and saying, you have to do this, because that's not necessarily going to work. Even if it is a requirement of policy, some people are going to be hesitant anyway. So my goal is really just to persuade and incentivize.
So will the response to multiple infractions, do you see that being university-wide or based in the student's major or school? How do you envision that happening?
This is going to be an important question, so I'm going to repeat it. This is a question about the response to multiple offenders and how that will be handled.
Yes. So currently there are some aspects of that can be handled at the college level, like dismissal from a program. But there are university-wide sanctions like probation, suspension, expulsion that can be handled through student conduct. And so that's what I see happening, is more of that university-wide piece, making that very consistent, working on the process for how that happens. Because currently, what we've been doing is notifying the college where a student is majoring when there are multiple offenses, and then it's largely up to the college to say, yes, please, let's look at some additional sanctions. I'd like there just to be a more consistent and objective process for when a student has multiple offenses, to assess that and decide if something more is needed.
Who gets notified?
Associate deans right now.
No,
And
the associate dean.
Yeah.
so I get the first, yeah.
Yeah, well, it would be associate deans of academic affairs. Yeah, so it would be, and I have been hitting a broad variety of people because we want to see something happen.
Yes.
It's well defined in Eberly, it's well defined in Statler who those people are, and they are typically they have seen the most multiple offenses. In fact, I don't think we know that we've seen anybody outside of those two.
I've seen Yes, I've seen a few,
Okay.
but ones that are coming up this year.
Yeah,
I've
the vast
started
majority
seeing.
have been in those two.
So I'm hearing about things anecdotally at the end of the semester. And I think it's this whole culture change with faculty to get them to understand that it's not the process that you were talking about where you gave up a year of your time to follow through on
On a course.
complaint.
Yes.
But so there was a survey done on how you handle academic dishonesty, and it may have just been at the Health Sciences Center.
Okay.
Was it the one that Mariette Barbier and her group did?
I can't even
Was
remember who
it
did
was one of the I think there were 2 surveys that the teaching
So somebody
fellows
did a
there
survey,
did.
But all of the responses, there was no response that you could say, I assumed it was a student's first offense. They didn't use references and citations properly, so I saw this as a learning opportunity, and I made sure that they understood that this was how to do. So there was no response like that. It was just like, well, if you didn't report it, why? And
Okay.
so my
Yes.
question is, and this may be way down the road, is are there opportunities to do that with a student without reporting them? Or does everything need to be reported, even knowing it may be the student's one and only offense because they really didn't, especially international students?
Again, I'll address what I did this past year and changed, and then let you talk to what you want to do in the
Yes.
future. We adjusted the form this past year because there wasn't a no sanction section, right? Like the first iteration of the form was like, what sanction? There must be a sanction, you must do something. And then so I added a no sanction warning kind of thing. So that way, if you just wanted to tell a student like, this wasn't okay, you've been warned, but someone also knows that you have been warned, right? Because what happens and what we have seen is, an instructor will say, I warned them earlier in the semester, and then report it. Well, no, actually, you warned them earlier in the semester. That's not a multiple offense. I've got one report. Report them, and then if you want to nail them that second time because they've done it twice in your class, we can be like, yeah, no, look, you've got a warning, and you got nailed. Like, you're stupid, right? But if I don't have this, we couldn't do this. We couldn't do anything on that second offense. So we've just added hey, no action's being taken. That's fine. I don't care. We don't care. Let us know you have talked to a student about this, again, so that if it comes back up, and if that student hits 3 times, and one was a warning, and one was in another class, and one is in another class, that's a very different situation, right? And it should be.
Yes, I would echo what he said, because even in cases where a student may not understand something, they still have committed a violation, and even if no sanction is given, it's incredibly helpful for me to know that something has happened, because it could be a situation where they've done something in multiple classes in the same semester, so you think this is a one-off, but they're in an English class and they've committed plagiarism. And the other thing that I would say is that some of those mitigating factors can be taken into account. I had a case that was referred with multiple offenses, and in talking to the student, one of my colleagues and I were pretty confident that at least a large portion of what had happened was just misunderstanding on his part. So we talked with the college that had reported this and came to an agreement that we would put him on probation. We'd do some educational sanctions with him so that he could really learn why what he did wasn't correct. And then he was on more of a larger warning that if he did something again, the sanctions would be very serious. And that was just a case where the college had actually wanted more severe sanctions because they saw a repeated pattern of behavior, but it wasn't entirely clear to those of us outside of the situation that he may have cheated, but it may have been because of a misunderstanding. So I just want to reassure you that we're not, when we take this university-wide look and look at the pattern of behavior of what a student may be doing across multiple classes or multiple schools and colleges, some of those factors can be taken into account. So faculty don't need to be concerned that we're just going to say, okay, you've been reported up here, we have to put the hammer down. I'm
It's not the Fargo woodshedder.
No. I am very committed to looking, reviewing the evidence before saying, okay, you're done, you're out. So yes.
Dump them in.
I was just, do I need need to use the mic or just?
No, I'll repeat.
Okay. So I was just gonna, kind of what you were saying about using it as an educational moment. I've just found that reporting it actually really helps there because the students really take it seriously and really listen. So I think, like, I've always reported whether or not I actually did a sanction, and I never found the old process, honestly, to be that cumbersome anyway, because I've found it was just a really good, like, they're like, oh my gosh, you really take this seriously, and like suddenly they're all ears. And I think that the act of reporting itself actually helps make sure maybe it is just a one-time thing.
Yeah, no, I concur, and I'll repeat and just kind of add my agreement that reporting itself can be a teaching moment, right? Even if it's a no sanction, you can say, hey, someone else knows, right? We've notified the institution, and those records don't go anywhere, and no one else can access them, so you don't have to feel like they're a stain on a student's record. A UF shows up, so if you sign a UF, and we'll talk about UFs here in a second, they do, but everything else is just, it's lost to the mystery of institutional processing. But yeah, it's a teaching moment. You've notified someone outside knows. If you do this again, you're in trouble, right? And it's a good moment to then kind of stop back and reflect, hopefully as a student, that you have done something that has consequences, that in a professional setting will have consequences. And there are lots of disciplines that have professional responsibilities. I'm looking at my engineering folks, I've got public health here, you can't do these things in your profession and last. You can't get certified in some professions if you do it as a student. You've just kissed your nursing career goodbye or your social work career goodbye. So those are things to be like, hey, stop, this has real world consequences.
Yes. The one thing I would add is if you are in a situation where you're giving a student a warning but are reporting it, please make sure they understand that that is an official record, because I've run into this already with students saying, well, but I haven't committed multiple offenses because I only got a warning the first time. And I had to explain that no, that still means you did something wrong, you just weren't sanctioned for it. So just make sure that they understand, yes, I have determined that you committed academic dishonesty. I am not sanctioning you for it beyond a warning, but this is going into an official record.
And I'm not making this point to in any way say people shouldn't do that, because I think there are a lot of good reasons too. But have you guys talked with the law school and other professions where on your graduate application you have to check a box if you've ever been formally accused of academic dishonesty, and that might actually make it very difficult for you to pass character and fitness, for example. When you said the law school handles it in-house, I suspect that's exactly why.
Yes, they have to report on character and fitness for the bar, so
if you have academic dishonesty in if you check that box in a law school application, for example, it might make it very unlikely that you're going to be accepted to law school. And I'm not saying that's a reason not to report
yes.
as a faculty member. I just want to make sure we've kind of thought that through, because the idea that recording a warning helps us but doesn't harm the student may not actually be true. If they're warned by a faculty member who doesn't record it, I don't know if they'd have to check that box in the same way if they're warned by a faculty member who does record it. Does that make sense?
It does.
It does.
And I would say just from a policy level, you can always write college level policy that's more strict or additional to the institutional policy. So a warning is just that, it's a warning. And if you want to say this and tell students, say, hey, when we record a warning, this is just that, it's a warning. You wouldn't have to then file it for your particular profession. That's fine. That wouldn't supersede or overwrite anything in the institutional policy. So if that was the concern of a particular school or profession, there'd be nothing to stop you from saying that warning is a warning. Treat it as such. And still know as a student, though, that you have been recorded, right? And have the best of both worlds. Because again, we don't want to unduly punish students for a warning, and I don't want to disincentivize faculty from reporting. So if that's the disincentive, then the policy is that that's fine. Let students know that they don't have to check that yes. If it's just a warning, fine, you've gotten your warning. The next one's going to count then, I would hope, right? And again, that would be something we could see as like, well, you've got warning, you got another warning, you got warning 3, what the heck's going on there, right? Hopefully, as an institution, we don't want lawyers that have been warned 3 and 4 times, or nurses that have been warned 3 or 4 times. I would have concerns about that practice.
Yes, I completely agree. I think it can absolutely be, in one-on-one conversation with the student, what Lou was saying, the student could be advised that they didn't have to report that, but just knowing that if they did something again, then that would be something that would really have to be reported because they would have shown a pattern of behavior. Just having them know that we're taking it seriously, even though it's not something that we're putting on their transcript permanently or that is necessarily going to follow them for years, just making sure they know we're serious.
It's always more exciting than I think it's going to be. Dave.
But we're talking about cheaters.
Did you report suspected cheating for cheating that we as faculty have, well, what does proven even mean in this context?
So if it's suspected, I would ask at that point that the faculty member call and talk it through with me or with someone else, a department chair, to work through their suspicions. I don't know that there's a way to report suspected cheating, and the form doesn't account for that, but that is somewhere that I would still be happy to step in and help a faculty member work through doubts they might have or figure out a plan. Actually, I was talking to Dan Robeson and Todd Petty in Davis College today, and they said, a lot of their faculty don't necessarily know what to do when a situation of cheating arises. So they said, is there someone in your office that we could call and have come as a proctor on an exam if the faculty member has suspected cheating, someone to be an extra set of eyes. And I think something like that, where maybe there were specific faculty in a college who were trained to help spot cheating or help faculty work through discipline-specific issues that someone might be uncertain about. I think that kind of program would have a lot of benefit, because faculty aren't necessarily trained to know when something is cheating or isn't, but they might see something that's a bit off. And so having some kind of plan in place is something I'm going to be looking into.
So the question was about reporting suspected cheating. I think there's also a parallel discussion about your word as a faculty member. So if you don't have this concrete evidence, like you don't need a photograph, you don't need to grab their watch, you don't need to have that thing that proves they were cheating. That's the definition of suspicion, right? If you think they were cheating, you suspect they were cheating, and you have a narrative that would say, this is why I think they were cheating, that's good enough to start. That's good enough to report, right? That, again, you are the academic professional. We assume you're an academic professional. That's why you're in the room. What did you see that set off your alarm bells?
This exactly gets to Amy's question about the record. So there was an honors student in political science who was accused of cheating by her professor because her and a similar test from a similar student looked identical. It turns out they studied together.
Okay.
And the test looked identical because, well, they studied together, and so their answers looked very similar. She's off to law school. If, in theory, she's been officially accused of cheating because the professor called her in and had a conversation. If you're supposed to just report the accusation, then that would have been officially reported, and she would have to report that she had been accused of it. It turns out the professor accepted, yeah, okay, you were studying with somebody else and it wasn't. So again, that's my question about where in the process.
There's also a way just to expunge that record. The database that holds these, we adjusted, I don't know, maybe a half dozen last year, where someone would report, talk to the students, and then would email me and say, hey, after I talked to the students, I realized there was situation X and I don't want that. I don't want that offense. And you can retract that then, right? The forms are the forms. They're just a reporting tool. The thing that matters is the database where they actually say they were an offender. That can just get cleared out, and we just wipe that out and say that didn't exist. That never happened. So again, I would rather have you report what you think.
The default is to report.
That would be, and that's mine passed.
I mean, I would say that if you have the opportunity to talk to the student first and clear up any of those issues and then file the report, that's also fine. I mean, many of the reports come in. I had one where a faculty member told me that she went and discussed it with someone in her college first to make sure that she was doing things correctly. It's not an immediate reporting kind of situation. You can, as a faculty member, take some time, step back, talk to others in your college, call me, or talk to the student, try to figure out what's going on before you actually file that report. That's fine.
Well, you have a time lapse from discovery to notification to the student. So you have so many days there to figure out what's going on.
Which is why I think that's current policy, and we'll be looking at current policy pretty extensively. Current policy, I would say default to reporting. If you end up having a meeting because you couldn't get a hold of the student, or whatever until later, then just walk it back. That's fine, and we can expunge it. It's not a big deal. It's not difficult at all.
Exactly.
Catherine?
Yeah, I'd just like to address the suspicion of cheating. Our faculty have been totally burnt by that. And I think that it's really, really difficult for, at least in our school, to, faculty are pretty savvy. They think there's some cheating going on. I can't spot where it is. I know it's going on. But that suspicion is just not enough. The student comes back to their attorneys. It's contentious. The faculty loses an enormous amount of time working through the issue. And in the end, everybody's lost. I mean, so we've just been so burnt about this suspicion thing, and now we have to have the proof.
Yes.
I see our numbers, and I would say if we did all the suspicion, you know, and we know that it'd be 5 times as high. And I don't mean to put a bad note on our students. I'd say most of our students are just really stellar. But there's just a small number that just want to try everything. You know?
The stakes involved matter a lot. So if you
Yes.
suspect cheating and you're talking about changing an assignment grade, and it's going to have a minor impact, right? That's one thing because it's not likely to get involved. There were particular cases, not just in nursing, where there was suspicion and it was connected to program dismissal or expulsion. That's a different critter, right? And if you think it's going to go that way, so part of it is, you know, the context of faculty knowing that student and the program and what the consequences are. If you're sitting there thinking, I think the student cheated on a low stakes exam and the consequences that they're likely to be expelled from the program, I would take a step to think, I probably want more evidence than to report this, right? If on the other hand, again, you're in a 100 level class with a freshman and you see them constantly glancing at their paper, that's good enough to have a conversation and warn someone about, like, that's not appropriate behavior.
Yes.
So it is not easy enough to make blanket statements. You know, my default is to report. If you've got reasons not to report on suspicion, that's fine too. But again, you've got a resource now to talk those things through who will be able to
Yes.
say, hey, what are you looking at? Are you looking at program dismissal? Are you looking at professional standards? Are you looking at expulsion?
Yes.
Call Azealia, talk that through, and she can say, yeah, in this case, maybe not, right? But that was specific to nursing and what the consequences associated with that event were.
And the other thing is just whack-a-mole. I'm serious. It is, you put into place all the things that response to an event, you know, like 2 months later, 3 months later, something else comes up.
Yes.
It's just,
They're remarkably creative when it comes to getting around the,
Entrepreneurial.
yes, entrepreneurial. That is one way of putting it.
Could I
Yes.
just add one more thing? In terms of student cheating, my observation of this is that the reason they cheat is because they've got away with it for so long. It starts in middle school, goes all the way through high school. It's just a mode of operation. I don't think they're bad people, by the way. It's just that how they see what we call cheating, it's just a completely different frame of reference for us than it is
Yes.
for them. So I don't think they're bad people. On the other hand, we don't have to accept bad behaviour.
Exactly.
Or poor behaviour, which obviously nursing is critical, and for a lot of others as well. But I like the warning thing. I think it's the only thing that makes them pay attention. But the burden of proof for faculty is growing and growing and growing. And it just makes it really hard for them to act, especially
Yes.
given this sort of ingrained expected behaviour of students that to get ahead you've got to cheat. The mentality is just staggering, but it's a different generation.
And that's something that we can certainly think about as we look at policies is, you know, what are some best practices for getting that proof? What can how can we help faculty have those tools so that it's not such a burden? You know, and the appeals process is another part of that we'll be looking at in terms of policy, because that again takes a good bit of time. So these are things that we can certainly look at. And another of the things that I'll be doing with my role is educating students, trying to really move the needle on the culture and getting them to understand why academic integrity is important. And that's not going to be an overnight process. It's not going to reach all of them, but hopefully, you know, reinforcing to them that the things you did throughout middle school and high school, those aren't going to fly here. You know, trying to instill the values while also instilling a bit of fear, a healthy respect for what will happen if they violate the rules, and then just really making sure that they have the tools in place, you know, whether it's recognizing that they need tutoring assistance or, you know, other kind of tangential supports that can help them. I think all those pieces can really help us move the needle a bit on the culture.
Educational resources was one of the driving needs to get someone like Azealia here. When I went out just informally and talked to departments, OGA students, so international students, and did a survey, the baseline knowledge of what constitutes academic standards is almost nil, even for domestic students. It's astonishing what they don't know. And that was something, again, where nothing has been done. I wasn't able to do anything, and someone's going to need to develop those materials and, again, make a practice of delivering them to students constantly over time, not just at freshman orientation, but then again in sophomores, and then again in seniors, and then, and they change because professional standards also grow and change over time. It's one thing as you're a freshman, it's a different thing as you're in the School of Nursing, it's a different thing again as you enter engineering, and continue to extend that conversation. And we just haven't done that here. I was just astonished what they thought paraphrasing was. That's the thing that comes back to me. We're like, I changed articles. And I'm like, yeah, yes, I got you. And again, they're informal conversations, so there was no risk. I'm like, yeah, I got you. But man, I got to tell you, that's going to get you nailed every single time. Like, that's not paraphrasing.
Yeah. I had a similar experience when I was doing my dissertation work. I was interviewing business students about things, including how they define academic integrity and academic dishonesty. And I treated those as separate concepts. And it was amazing the amount of hemming and hawing and not being able to spit out a definition or saying they were the same thing. And I'm over here going, no, integrity and the opposite of integrity are not the same. So yes, I mean, there's just an astounding lack of knowledge about what these things mean, both conceptually, which is what I was more looking at, and then in terms of the nuts and bolts of how to paraphrase, how to properly cite things. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen.
So on that front, will the library module that goes through all of these things and that students can take, and also I know at one point Catherine Kierker had like that 10-unit eCampus module that was more in depth, but those things cover in detail. I mean, are those programs going to be continued or institutionalized or updated?
I've been talking with the library about that module, and I know they're planning to do some revisions, make some additions, including on things like self-plagiarism that students constantly struggle with understanding. So yes, certainly those kind of resources, I want to create some new resources for things like student orientation, freshman seminars, things like that, but also not reinvent the wheel. We have resources here.
The one that Catherine did, the eCampus one, I think it's still up there, is really detailed about all of this. Like, it's much more detailed than the one the library did.
Yeah.
It's for graduate level.
No, I've used it for undergrads.
Really?
100 level classes. So,
Okay.
and it's worked pretty good in those contexts.
Good to know. Yeah, any and all educational resources that you know of that faculty use individually or that are at that university level that you're talking about, please let me know, because I'm happy to create new resources, but also why reinvent the wheel if there is good stuff out there. So
This was reporting by class rank, so what rank the student was themselves. And I've got it set against what you could see for, the blue bar is 15, 16, 16, 17 combined, and then the orange bar is what we saw just in 17 and 18. And I'll show you the course level distribution soon, but what strikes me was this, where we're still reporting very few freshman level, and I think there are two potential reasons for that. One, I think it's our course sequencing. A lot of people take their Jeffs later, and those are going to be courses they care less about, and so there's going to be more impetus to cheat in those low-level courses that you're just fulfilling a Jeff requirement for when you're a senior or a junior or even a sophomore, and I think that's what you see the bump there. Because when we look at course distribution, which I think better be next, yay, the course level distribution looks like what you'd expect it. It's lots of 100 level courses. It's like almost half of 200, half 300, half 400, and almost no graduate level. So I think when you take them in tandem, the way I have interpreted that, knowing the Gen Ed program as well as I do, is that we let people take those Gen Eds later in the program when it doesn't matter to them. They care about the courses in their major at that point, right? And I'm taking whatever 101 in my senior year. Who cares? Well, that's an opportunity then to cheat. It's a reason to cheat. It's a low investment situation, and I think part of the larger discussion for the institution is structuring Gen Ed or Gen Ed in a way that maybe puts those opportunities early as possible, as often as possible. Are you laughing at me?
Oh, good luck with that.
I know. That's all right.
well, and not to rain on your parade, but I've also found that it doesn't matter when students take those Gen Eds, they're cheating in them anyway. But at least then we'd have a more expected distribution.
I want to see a pretty
other
distribution curve. That's all I care about. I don't care about whether it works.
Is there a piece to this that is relative to class size? Because I could see that going either way. Like on the one hand, you'd expect classes with more students have more reporting, and on the other hand, the burden for reporting is much higher when you've got 750 students, and I can't I mean, I literally could report them all, but I wouldn't do anything else.
I'm gonna see if I can actually find that thing. Where's that? Yeah, perfect, perfect, nailed it.
You're welcome.
Thank you. These are the courses with high reports, and yeah, they are a lot of the big high enrolled common courses. We didn't do an analysis on that, but I think you see the biggest gaps and the biggest reports at the same token. Like I said about English 101 is a major gap just because of how many students we know go through that sucker every year, and you're like, that can't possibly be the number reporting. But then you look at something like CS 101, it has a gazillion students every year. It's not surprising, it's up there, right? It's a gazillion students in an intro level course that's probably gonna be low stakes for everybody, so of course. Chem 115 is a gateway course. Everyone takes it, goes to Statler and all those, so it's a huge one. There was a bio course that was just off this chart too. But you got the engineering 101, engineering 102, the site courses are those gateway site courses, so I would assume, the natural thing to assume is there is a correlation. You would think
Yes.
there's more reporting out of big courses, and that gets more difficult to do depending on who's teaching them also, right? If it's high TAs like English 101, that's probably difficult because it's difficult to keep those TAs constantly trained, to get them to do it, to encourage them to do it well, because then you have things like, well, God, are they confronting the students? So don't do that. Like, I would rather you not confront the students, and then that discourages reporting. And so I think there's a lot going on there.
And it's not, oh, go ahead.
So, well, part of the reason I'm asking is because in biology, I feel like we're one of those gap spaces, right? We have tons of students. I would like to say we don't see a lot of cheating, and I'm trying to figure out as a department, is that because we're not seeing it, right? Like it's happening and we just don't know how to find it, or because we're actually, I don't know, setting the model for how you discourage.
Not to be discouraging, but
There's Vegas
Yeah.
odds, yeah.
yeah, I would guess that there's probably a lot of latent cheating going on for several reasons. One is that it's hard for faculty to spot in larger courses. Another is, again, these gateway courses students don't really care about. They just need to get through them to get through their gen eds or get to whatever major they want. And they lack, the students really lack a meaningful connection with the faculty member. That's why I've seen, at least from student reports, cheating drop off in major classes. For one thing, students are invested in the major, and they're also sitting there in smaller classes with faculty who they're getting to know, so that's going to deter at least some students from cheating because they feel like they're going to let the faculty member down. But in a 200-person class, they really don't care. I mean, they have no relationship. They don't feel like they're letting anyone down. They're just doing what they need to do. So I expect that there probably is more cheating going on than is reported, but we can help. we can help you figure out what might be going on and how to.
We're following everything we know is a best practice, right? We have tons of proctors. We give different versions of the exam across the room, right? And we're grading them in ways that we think are the right way to do it. But the numbers to me seem improbable. And so if there are other things we should be doing, then I'd like to know what they are.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so this starts getting into places then where it's more like, we're talking a lot about what departments and colleges can change. Part of what the data showed us was what we need to change on the policy definitions side.
Yes.
And what I think this showed was that faculty know what plagiarism is, right? It's like, plagiarism, nail them. Lots of plagiarism, that's easy to pick out. Giving, receiving unauthorized aid, right, was the next most common, and that's this. Typically someone's using something or someone they shouldn't, right? Or giving someone something they shouldn't. But that's kind of similar to engaging in prohibited behavior, which is kind of similar depending on the aid not authorized, it tailed off really quickly. There's like 8 million choices you have. And it mostly fell into those two categories because I think those are the two categories that are easy to understand. You either plagiarized or you did something you shouldn't have in one way or the other. It's those things. And we have these other categories where even Azalea and I, she's the expert in this field, I'm the supposedly institutional expert, I'm like,
I had to read some of the current definitions several times to really figure out what they meant. And part of the other problem was faculty will frequently check multiple boxes, probably because it's not clear what any of these definitions mean.
Yeah.
And prior to you adding the field where faculty had to explain what behavior happened, I'm sitting there looking back at some of these historical documents where it's just check marks going, what happened?
What would have been these 4 things.
Yes.
Which is part of the reason we added a little text box. If you've seen that, I tried to keep the reporting form as super short as possible to encourage reporting. That was the intent. But then we would get report forms where it was like, they engaged in prohibited behavior, they gave unauthorized aid, they received, and you're like, I don't know what happened in this event. And then and the funny thing is, often you get a description of, they looked at the student's exam, and you're like, why would you have checked those 4 things? And then so it's helping us, but again, that feedback has helped us realize the policy's the problem, the definitions are the problem,
Yes.
right? Which is then hopefully if we get to a good set of definitions, that becomes clear, and again, we can start seeing other patterns, because the next kind of thing that comes out of this, I mean, that who cares, is where these things happen. And it's fascinating for me that our 100 level courses see everything, right? And then it's like a little less, just plagiarism by the time you hit 400 and in graduate level. And that's part of what I was talking about, Tricia Phillips and I working on is, well, is that research ethics? Is that research integrity violations? Is there something else? Are we conflating the two? What are we seeing in research reporting when we're working on that? So it's hard to know, is that maybe that's the only reason those are coming through at the higher level, is because that's all that they see as academic integrity, and there are other things and other systems for grad students. Or maybe there's just not a real good way of even looking at that at the institution. The engaging in prohibited behavior thing was weird to me, that it was almost always just at the 100 level. And it's that blue bar that it literally drops out of existence after that. And that's usually when a faculty member has put something in a syllabus and says, don't do X. This will get you in trouble, right? And you would think that would be, I can see that being commented on 100 level, I get that, but you would think also as you go later, you have more specific things. Like I can remember teaching upper division courses, like this now is what I don't want you to do, right? And I got very specific, and I was surprised that then that never happens after the 100 level, which is it doesn't seem to gel with what that is, unless that's not what we're thinking about as engaging in prohibited behavior, but that's what that's supposed to mean.
Yeah, and it could be, unauthorized collaboration is a phrase frequently used for that kind of prohibited behavior that, some faculty are okay with collaboration, others aren't, so those who aren't put it in the syllabus, and maybe, as students progress into majors, there are more opportunities for authorized collaboration, and so, that could be the explanation. I have no idea, but obviously we need to clean up our definitions so that we know what in the heck we're looking at, talking about what is actually happening. So
these were the sanction distributions. It's good that we saw such a high recommendation of change in assignment grade. That makes me happy, because that means, for the most part, we're taking a first offense as a first offense and saying, here's something minor. It's bad that everything after that is pretty even, because there's a giant difference between a change in the final grade and that UF, and we're more or less treating them as the same kind of thing. I would like, again, just as a data guy, you would hope that there would be a progression from least severe, and then it would tail off to most severe, and the UF would be the most severe on this particular chart. There are other things like suspension, expulsion that we didn't put in there, but you would expect that UF to be fairly rare. And again, when we show you by rank, so how often this happens to freshmen, it's like, ooh, we're nailing our freshmen to the wall, and we're not nailing our grad students to the wall, which is really strange also. But again, I think that's part of not having had guidance about what kinds of sanctions go with what kind of offenses and what kind of situations. I think it's in here. By department, some departments were super, super consistent, and it's clear that they have department policy. On first offense, you give a changed assignment grade. And there are some departments where it's like, change in assignment grade, change in failure. It was a wild west depending on what faculty member got you in that department, what you come out with. And again, we don't want to set your expectations for what that should be. We want to help you get consistent, right? Odds are you will get appealed if you do this for a first offense. Odds are you will lose if you do this. And having better data will help us understand what gets appealed, what doesn't, what gets appealed and held, what gets appealed and overturned. And again, appeals data is something we don't have in here because we had so little appeal data reported. Pretty much 2 departments reported their appeals, which is usually either your department chair or your first level dean. And beyond that, we don't know what happened in appeals. So part of the push we'll be making this year in talks like this is if you're a dean, hi, how you doing? Report those appeals.
You're confusing me with the people with real.
Go poke them for me then.
Mr. Worker bee.
Yeah, actually, one way that I've heard it described by the psych department, who does a lot of these change in assignment grades. They refer to them as surgical sanctions because it's designed for the assignment in which the dishonesty happened. They give the change in grade. I think they give a 0 by policy on that assignment. And they talk to the student about it, and that's it. But it's been remarkably effective because the sanction matches the offense. It's focused on the offense instead of a general, okay, you plagiarized something on a small reflection paper that's worth 2% of your grade, and we gave you a UF. As you said, that's going to result in an appeal.
Dave?
Why is consistency a goal? It seems to me, it's all plagiarism, but there's widely varying degrees of plagiarism. And somebody who cites something inappropriately is guilty of plagiarism. Somebody who pulls an entire paper off the web and just sticks their name on it is also guilty of plagiarism. So they're very different offenses.
Yes.
And they probably should receive different sanctions.
Yes.
Therefore, why are we trying to achieve consistency?
So when I say consistency, don't think of it, it's not a one-to-one match, right? It's a range of good practices, right? For that reason. So if plagiarism as a first offense generally results in anything from a change in an assignment to a change or a failure of the course for the egregious, right? Then that's the good bumpers to know. And all I'm trying to say is there should be bumpers that you're aware of. And the things that should inform those bumpers are, what were the stakes of the exam? It was a 10-point assignment. What was the egregiousness of the offense? It was a miscitation versus a copy and paste of a dissertation, right? I don't ever want to say first offense plagiarism. Again, this is me, and I'll smack me if I'm. Yeah. I would never want to say first offense plagiarism equals change in assignment grade, right? It is the idea of data is it's this range. A first offense of plagiarism is typically a change in assignment grade to a failure of the course. Those don't tend to get overturned. When you hit the UF, that almost always got appealed, and a lot of them got overturned. So it's kind of like, hey, look, and that doesn't say you can't do the UF, but if you're going to go there, you better have your guns drawn. You better understand why you're asking for that sanction, right? So for me, it's not saying this is a one-to-one match, this isn't the way we sanction, but these are the things that generally stick. This is the context you should take into account and kind of then make an informed decision about why you're sanctioning the way you're sanctioning.
Yes.
Why are the appeals overturned?
We don't have that data.
My guess would be that the committee looking at it feels that, say, a UF is too harsh for an incident that, say, involves a freshman who plagiarized for a small assignment. I mean, that would be my guess, but.
We need to collect, again, that's the appeal data that we don't have. I don't know. That's why I'm going to encourage more and more appeal data together with Azalea so we can understand what is losing and why, because we don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
I teach Chem 115, so guilty as charged. So in our practice of reporting and our cheating cases, I think exclusively happen in exams. And so far, I think that in the last 2 years, our recommended sanction has pretty much been F in the course or UF. And the reason that we didn't go to assignment change is that, like, for one of our exams, if we caught student cheating, so like bottom line is, okay, you're gonna get 0 on the exam. And our reality is for students who struggle enough to actually attempt that in an exam, they're not doing very well throughout the semester. A 0 on one exam, we only have 3 regular exams. A 0 on one exam is essentially a F in the course. And anything less than that, well, like if you gave them a 0 on the exam, well, they turn around, they withdraw from the course, and there's essentially no punishment. And so a F there, okay, like at least you're gonna have to earn your Chem 115 back clean. And then, okay, if it's, well, the Apple Watch case happened in my class. So if it's that, like, pre-organized type, then we go for the UF. But anything less than that, for us, for what happened, for our students, it wasn't really a punishment.
And that, I mean, that's something that's been decided on a departmental level. It's consistent. There's a standard. And the thing that I would add on about the idea of consistency is, if it doesn't have to be consistency for plagiarism as a lump or exam cheating as a monolithic idea, because those aren't monolithic. And one of the definitional things that I think needs to be changed is the fact that plagiarism is just kind of one lump definition, and there's a lot of nuance to plagiarism. And so what I'm really wanting to see is consistency across similar types of behavior or situations where there are, circumstances like 3 exams where you're describing, where it just makes sense to give either an F or a UF. That's what you just explained is entirely logical to me. So I think it's just consistency in having sanctions that make sense, that fit the offense, that motivate the students, incentivize or disincentivize them from a certain behavior. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all, which is honestly why the input of each department is so important, because I don't have the background to understand, say, what goes on in dentistry. I don't understand what some of the issues they face are, what some of the professional standards, and I can certainly learn that, but any policy changes we look at have to have a lot of input from the colleges so that we know what needs to change, what makes the most sense.
And a lot of room then for you to then make your own policy within
Yes,
that, right?
absolutely.
The institutional policy always has to allow for room at the collegiate and department academic unit level to do whatever makes sense for them.
Yes.
Well, what do you do when they drop the course? So there's basically they've eliminated the sanctions.
No. And that's been a misconception that I've tried to clear up too. If you get sanctioned for academic dishonesty, so even just a failure of the course, and they withdrew, we need to know that. And so part of that was communicate. There was no person communicating. But if I know that, now Azalea knows that, if they withdraw and they have an F for that sanction, that F doesn't go anywhere. They can't withdraw from a sanction with an F. Like, that stays. So, and they say, yeah, we did that for you, right?
Actually, this summer, I actually had 2 cases that students, I gave them, F for plagiarism. It's actually really severe plagiarism. But they withdrew from the course. It took me at least a few weeks or jump through several hoops to actually change their grade from W to F. And I think that's something, probably at the university level.
That's good to know.
Set up a faster
clunky.
way
Yeah.
to do that, because I had to call the registrar
Yeah.
and then email some information to the registrar people, and then also got the information back and that you are not at the level, or me as the professor's not at the level to change that. You have to ask your dean to do it. And of course, I send it to the dean, and the dean has to send it to the registrar office and make it happen. So
we can add that to the list of.
I had that experience this past
Yeah.
summer, so I want to share.
It got, so, and Lee was just sharing how this process has happened to her. She had a student withdraw from having had the F sanction. And it's one of those things where you see the process not working the way it should. It should not be call to bounce to call to bounce to call to bounce. Part of that to begin, there's never been someone here that can occupy that space and facilitate that, right? That's going to be facilitated. But just as a knowledge point, they can't run from sanctions, right? That's the important thing. They can't just drop out of a course and leave it. If we know that they've done that, we can fix it. And now we have someone who can actually police that and make sure it happens smoother.
But 0 on a test doesn't necessarily mean they'll fail. And if they drop it, then gone.
To Ming Ming's point, think about your sanctioning then, right? So if you want to make sure that sanction sticks, then you've got to do something that then they can't run away from.
And that's why that stuff's up there. That's why there's so many of those.
Yeah.
It's because that's it. If it happens after ad drop, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
But if it's before ad drop, and you're finding collusion, and it's
Yes.
you have to go for the max.
Just want to
Something I found out though is that even if you were doing the 0 on the assignment, I had to do this last week with a student, even if you're doing a 0 on an assignment, because the student was this close to withdrawing from the course because she was doing so poorly anyways, you can request that the dean contacts the registrar and puts a block so they still cannot withdraw.
Okay.
So if based on that 0, they earn their F, it will be there because they don't have that option.
Yeah, they
So
can't
you
run.
can still actually use that 0 on the assignment sanction, make them sit through and actually try to do the course properly and see if they can pull it out, but they don't have the option of withdrawing. You have to request that.
You
But
can
the
block a
system you're
student
gonna-
from withdrawing?
We can't, but we can request
Yeah.
that the dean does it through the registrar, yeah.
But the system you're putting in place would then,
We're going to have to address this
Yes.
process-wise. Like,
This
this is going to
is-
be it won't be probably in the policy. It's a process thing that right now no one is facilitating, right?
Yes.
It's the same thing as notifying level 1 appeal reviewers, which I picked up and started doing, and then notifying people of multiple offenses. It was just a process thing where there was no one to occupy the spot of facilitating the process. So what we'll have to do is, as we talk through the policy, is think, all right, when we do this from procedurally, when we have students try and run, how will that process work? And again, educate people. This is how. You will do X. You will tell Y.
That'll be critical.
Yeah,
To make
exactly.
sure students
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
understand
I
Yes.
want to say that would be so much appreciated because, you know, if it were not happening in summer that I had time, I would
Yes.
probably just drop it because, you know, it's just so much going through.
Oh, I
and
believe
then
it.
catching, following up, and then, you know, that thing has on my to-do list for so many weeks. It was just kind of,
Yes, and a lot of
It
the
was clunky
cases-
with me helping, where I'm like, yeah, come on, and I was emailing
I
you.
didn't even know where to go. And
Yeah,
I
well, no,
"Oh,
neither
Lou
did I.
said, okay, we will."
I didn't either. I'm like, I don't know. Let me ask.
And a lot of those process pieces are just a little clunky right now, from the form, you know, filling out the whole process of filling it out, to then if a student commits multiple offenses and it goes to me to work through in student conduct. You know, I've been having to go back on one case to faculty who, you know, this happened several months ago, and I'm having to ask them for more information or to forward things, and that's just a long, clunky process, which some of that can't be avoided. If a student commits multiple violations over several months or even years, you know, we're going to have to dig back. But part of the process piece there is making sure that faculty really document things well on the form, that they describe what happened. You know,
form
figuring
captures that,
out-
so they don't
yes,
have- you know,
the form
that's
captures
exactly
that.
right.
We figure out a way to make sure that they have the emails that back up what they said or things like that. So there's a lot of process that needs to be worked through.
Just given what you were saying, Azalea, what is the magic number where you pick up on repeat violations and start getting student conduct involved? Or what are the triggers that?
Yep. So we're notifying colleges at 2 offenses. I know there was one that you'd notified an associate dean of at 2 offenses, and then I found a third just by going into, there's some gaps in how we're tracking these. There are 2 different systems that they're caught in. So I found a third, and at that point, the associate dean was interested in pursuing something. But that's why we want to clean up the process so that there is some magic number. You know, right now we're notifying it 2, but whether anything happens is kind of up in the air. So that's something we're
And you're just
working through.
notifying the students home college are not going to
Yes.
student conduct or anything like that?
Well, I'm also in student conduct, so student conduct is being notified by default. But we're not starting. I am not starting a proceeding at this point unless the student's home college is interested. But that may change. We'll see how things shake out.
This was sanctioned by course level, and this is one of the ones that I think scares me the most, which is if you look at freshmen, we massacre our freshmen, and then by the time they get to the grad level and 400 level courses, we're like, you're fine.
You're just about to enter your profession.
You're
and, you know.
good. I would assume it gets scarier to fail students at that level, right? It has much more severe consequences, so I get that. I think that's also part of working through like what we said about reporting warnings and developing a system that would allow people to report at that level and then get serious. But in the same token, it also scares me to see how often we UF freshmen for what is probably first offenses, how more that's disproportionate to even the 200 level, where it's still probably low stakes. So it's just, again, mostly I think this is indicative of bad policy and bad definitions and not having had data and guidance for a long time. The UF sits on their transcript. I always, you know, if you're scared of permanent record, that UF is a marker that tells anyone who ever looks at their transcript what they did in that course, which for me is much scarier than even a failure in a course where it impacts their GPA. It does impact their GPA, but then as a standing marker. So we need to do better on, again, understanding what sanctions go with what. And again, we didn't even know what sanctions were out there for what kinds of violations. Yeah.
I guess there's an alternative theory though too, which is that it's working, that the violations are getting less egregious as they go along because they're learning, and so faculty are appropriately lessening their violations, and so that could actually be a really great data point.
Or the students are getting more sophisticated about how to detect it.
Yes.
But also, per your previous slide, you were talking about sort of the unequal distribution of students taking their Jeff courses, right? And so So maybe your UFs and your 100 level courses are the juniors who are taking the 100 level courses where instructors think you really should know better and this one needs to hurt you.
So, and you know, like any good data project, the amount of analysis that needs done is massive. This was my first pass at our first data set, and it opens up as many questions as it does provide insights. And so the idea is, you know, this is one iteration to ask more questions about.
Yes.
And Azalea and I have already talked about all the different ways this would need to be sliced to really come to firm conclusions that are actionable. Part of the discussion, though, for me, I'm an assessment guy, is closing the loop, is talking to people. I did this. I asked you to do stuff. You did stuff. Let me tell you about what we see. I am, in fact, looking at it. We hired someone partially because of this. We're thinking about these places to impact. And there are going to be lots of places where we're like, I don't know, I don't want to go there yet. We don't know what's going on, right? Yeah, I think there are 3 or 4 competing explanations for that. It's at the course level. It's not necessarily at the student level. And I didn't do major analysis, partially because I didn't collect it in the form. You could do that through IR, but again, that's a whole other set of analyses that I didn't run because it wasn't my thing. So we'll be moving forward. We're catching major data, and all those things can be done and sliced that way.
Yes, I'm starting to capture major data, GPA data, all sorts of things that we can slice and dice. This is what I do for relaxation when I, need to chill at the end of the day. Is play with this data.
It's the good part. Honor standing, we're looking at TOEFL scores for international students,
Promise,
promise standing, all kinds of things. Again, after I did the first pass, I'm like, God, there were like 8 things I wish I would have known. Like, but that's the idea, is you do this and you suddenly realize there are all those additional questions you could have asked had you collected it right, had you done it differently.
Yeah.
This is one that gets to the bad definitions. We know what plagiarism is. We know it when we see it, and we sanction it pretty consistently. This is at the entire population level, right? So for the most part, it's always a change in assignment grade. There are some really egregious ones, to Dave's point, right? And those get stricter sanctions. But for the most part, plagiarism is institutionally understood, institutionally sanctioned. If you steal stuff belonging to faculty, which again, pretty clear, it's pretty serious, right? But those two are clear and easy to understand. I know what both of those mean. Everything in the middle is kind of like, meh. How do we sanction? Don't know. What is it? Don't know. And I think that's what you see in that middle group is it's all the stuff that it could be defined a whole bunch of different ways by different faculty, by different departments, sanctioned by different faculty, sanctioned by different departments. And again, I think this points to bad definitions and bad policy, right? These two things, the ones that are really easy to say what they are, fall out and shake out really well. The rest of it's a bit of a mess. Yeah,
Yep.
right?
No,
I mean,
I have nothing
simple,
to add
right?
to that.
This was just to show you, there are different levels of consistency between departments. Biology, when it does report sanctions, it seems like by policy. Psychology, when it reports plagiarism, seems to sanction by policy. CDFS does. I've asked them, they have a policy. Engineering, you got about a 50-50 chance of coming out, depending, where you're at. And that was true, again, across the 100 level. So it's different by instructor. English, which is interesting, has a whole big population of warnings that don't even get sanctioned, right? So you got sanctions, you got course failures, you got maybe an assignment change. And again, I would imagine they are seeing different variations of levels of plagiarism, so that probably makes sense. But we don't capture that either. We just see plagiarism. We don't see egregious plagiarism. We don't see bad citation, right? So part of this is to say there are consistency issues, maybe, and part of it is to say we also need to know what that maybe is and understand the nuances better and figure out how to actually get to those nuances better than we do.
By the way, I'm just going to add, this popped into my head on plagiarism. One of the ways that we're starting to really try to take it more seriously is not only in classroom settings, but in the conduct process itself. We have seen some situations where students are asked to write a reflection paper because of, say, an alcohol offense or something. And they either self-plagiarize or plagiarize someone else's reflection paper. And those, yes. I actually have a couple of those conversations this afternoon. They're going to be fun with students. But my point is, we can actually, if we, in student conduct, I'll be working with the case manager on the original case. And if we deem that it's serious enough for an academic misconduct charge, we can also give them a sanction from student conduct directly for that plagiarism. So those kind of things will also be tracked as an offense. So we're really trying to be serious and intentional about identifying these violations wherever they occur, whether it's in a classroom or outside. So it's interesting stuff.
Similar thing for giving, receiving unauthorized aid. That was the next major category of frequent offenses. And this is one you can see as like, again, total Wild West. Computer science apparently sees this and knows what this means in that class, right? And sanctions it fairly consistently. Chem and math, and again, maybe because it's vastly different for each situation, right? You've probably got Apple Watches, and then you've probably got people looking at tests. You've probably got people sharing drives and stuff, and then you've got people maybe taking notes improperly. So part of that definition thing is, again, the sanctions themselves tell you we're not clearly defining things. But part of the problem on our end is we don't want to see mad, crazy sanctions unless we understand them, and we don't understand this either. We can say it looks inconsistent, and that's what I would say is it looks inconsistent. But to Dave's point, I don't know that it is, right? We have to understand what are you calling giving and receiving unauthorized aid.
Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
Where you said engineering was inconsistent, there's a difference if you plagiarized on a major technical report that's worth, 50% and is long
Exactly.
versus a homework assignment. Right? One's probably going to be a warning and an assignment change, and one's not going to be.
Yes,
absolutely.
Final exams are,
right.
That's a game changer.
Yes.
And I thought about this over the course of the year, and we haven't discussed this privately yet or in policy, but I don't know how we would gather what the stakes were, but I think that's a piece that we need to know more about. Because if it is that 10-point homework in a 1,000-point class, that's one critter. If it's the 50% final exam, that's a different critter. And we have to, I think, to understand consistency, again, in a bigger sense, not one-to-one pairing, but when things should shake out, we need to know the stakes. And I think we're going to have to figure out in some way of determining what those things are.
I've gotten a couple of ideas. That model I showed you from UC San Diego, they have a process where they assign points to academic misconduct violations. And I think there's some pretty easy ways to add a small checkbox on the current form that captures things like what was the weight, in ranges. Was this a capstone project? Was it worth less than 10% of the grade? Was it, what was it? How serious was it?
I was even thinking like summative, formative assessment. Formative assessment should be feedback anyways. It's formative, it's summative, right? That's bad. You were supposed to be showing me that you got this stuff. So again, talking through all those different kinds of ways of determining what the stakes are.
So for example, Chem 115, we have multiple professors teaching parallel classes. And between me and another instructor, if we catch Apple Watch on the exam, I could be calling it receiving unauthorized aid, and the other professor could call it being engaging in prohibited behavior because we have that in the syllabus as well.
Yes.
Yep. It's just it's the definitions are confusing. I find them confusing, and I've lived with them for 2 years, and I still am like, I don't know.
Well, one of the things that we've had the discussion in our department is when you make a final exam worth 40 or 50% of the grade, the stakes are so high.
Yes.
That it compels them to, they could be failing the class through the entire semester, but if I can get an A on this, I can pull out passing. So one of the things that we've talked to them about is making sure that they are consistently showing that they understand the content all through the course, and that one of the things that helps is putting a minimum on every, which we learned that from chemistry. So that way they cannot pass the class if they get a 30% on this, but an 100% on this. And that's where we were seeing, that's what was raising all the red flags.
And I think that's why this partnership, I'm joking about stepping away and fading into the shadows, but this partnership can't dissolve because part of it's an assessment problem, right? And that's why Robin Shannon, who's the Assistant Director of Assessment, is here, because no matter what we do, part of it's an assessment issue. If you've got one test and it's worth 80% at the end of the semester, I'm going to tell you you've got higher incidents going on, and that's why, right? You've designed it so that it happens that way. They've never gotten feedback on how they do, and it's still 40% at the end. They've never gotten feedback. They don't know how they're doing. They're going to make sure they find the best way to do the best they possibly can. So there's going to be an assessment piece that says, what are the good practices to reduce this? And what happens when you don't, right? And what happens, what can we educate you to do, right? And so there's, this partnership always is going to have that, because they relate that way. And then to start picking up on what departments have done and are doing and take them institutionally, right? That's what we're trying
Absolutely.
this testing practice with chem and math right now. Will that work? Will that reduce those situations in those courses?
Yeah, so we have a situation where we do content testing at the end of every course. But it's only worth 10% of the grade, but it's a high stakes test. So with the thing you were mentioning about is it worth 10% of the course or whatever, yeah, that test is only worth 10%, but it's just, they have to pass it, they don't have to remediate, take it again, have to pass it. But it's only worth 10% of the course.
Remediation is one that I'm looking at particularly in health science programs because we're not doing remediation well, and that's a separate topic for a different day. But I've run into remediation needs in nursing, in pharmacy, and in medicine. And the practices are good, but the systems that we have in place don't let you remediate in a way that's more intentional and less high stakes. Right now it's like, it's course level remediation. Well, it was this competency, it was this thing. Well, you can remediate the course. Well, that's nuts, right? So we've got to figure out a system that's gonna let you remediate much more specific components of courses and competencies and demonstrate that through assessment.
Because I'd like to show you what we've done. I think our remediation is pretty good actually.
No, I just know that there's a need for figuring this out.
We have a dedicated person to tutoring.
You're all doing it great. We don't have a way of helping you do it, right? So like when medicine does it, they know exactly what needs remediated, but they have to put them into a whole nother section of the course. And it's like, well, it's only this piece. And right now they're kind of ignoring the other stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, from the accrediting hat, I'm going, oh, don't do that, right? That's not that course. But I don't have anything else to put you in that would let you remediate that thing that you know needs remediated, that you've documented needs remediated. So we've got to figure out a way that, again, it's a systems thing, a different discussion, but we've got to figure out a way on our end, probably in the registrar's office, to let you remediate specific components of courses at the grad level and the professional level when you can demonstrate, again, the way you're doing that this thing needs remediated.
They're still in the course. They haven't graduated from the course. It's not like after the course is finished.
It's within, okay, interesting.
But anyway, my
Yeah.
point was that as far as cheating goes, that's a high stakes test.
Yes.
Cheating occurs, it's only worth 10% of the grade.
That's good to know, to keep in mind how we capture that. So. All right, so I threw a couple of slides in here at the end on this multiple offender issue because it is one of the things that we're not doing as well right now as we could be. There are a lot of students who offend multiple times and just slip through the cracks, and that's not good for them. It's not good for their peers who know that they're getting away with cheating. It's a piece that we really need to look at, and so I pulled the multiple offenders that Lou referenced and looked at whether their multiple offenses happened in the same class, same semester, same class, different semester, and then the next two slides are different class, same semester, different class, different semester. So what was interesting to me was the most serious sanction that each of these students received. And so I was looking at each student in a longitudinal way, what happened with the first offense, and any subsequent offenses. So for students who cheated multiple times in the same class in the same semester, a lot of them got a UF at the end of it, but not all, which was interesting to me, especially if you think about the other category. That included things like change of an assignment grade or change of a course grade, but not course failure. And for me, if I'm a faculty member and I'm in a class where a student has cheated 4 times, which was one of the cases, in the same class, same semester, and they end up with the harshest sanction being a change in assignment grade, that's an educational piece that I need to work with faculty on to say, no, when this person has offended this many times, we need to do something more stringent. The same class, different semester, I mean, I put it up there, but there were only 2 cases of that. One was one of those that Lou referenced where there actually wasn't an official report made the first time, but the faculty member referenced it in their report this semester. And it was a situation where the student had the same professor for both classes. Yeah, it's complicated. So
I'm struggling. Are these DF repeats?
I think in that case it was.
They have to be, yeah.
Yes. So I forget what the other sanction was for the other case, but it was something less stringent than course failure. But the one who had a second report this semester did receive a UF. So that was good that system worked as intended. But when you start looking at students who cheat across different classes, either in the same semester or different semester, you start seeing these other sanctions, including change in assignment or course grade. You start seeing those increase a lot, which to me just suggests that faculty don't know, there hasn't been a good process in place. And again, some of those sanctions might stand if we're saying to faculty, you keep doing the classroom sanction, we'll do something more serious. But these are the most serious sanctions that these students received. And it's, again, this lack of knowledge, this lack of any kind of tracking and action being taken when there are multiple offenses. So I just throw these up here to say that obviously we need to do some work. We need to make sure that we're tracking these students and doing something, whether it's educational or punitive, that's more serious than them just receiving multiple changes in assignment grade if they are cheating multiple times. Because again, some of these were 2-time offenses, some were more.
So, but does somebody, right now, the current system, is somebody in the program or school alerted to these things?
Yes, they are now.
They
Yes.
are now.
They are now, but they weren't.
They weren't.
So, I mean, it was, a faculty would report it, but they would have no.
Exactly.
That's right. Well, and that's, we also want to take this away from, we want faculty, like I think Azalea said earlier, we want faculty to concentrate on the offense in their course, right? We want, and part of this is to show you like, hey, we know this is a problem. We know we haven't done it well. We want you to be able to focus on what's in your course, not worry about the multiple offenses. There will be a process to catch multiple offenses. If there is a multiple offense, we got them. Like, you take care of you. You do your course, your department, your program. That's important to you. Let someone else take care of the multiple offenses across programs, across time, across, those things need to be someplace else.
Yeah, so that faculty don't have to worry about, is this a chronic behavior? Should I be harsher with this?
Right. That's
the
not
faculty member can give the sanction they feel is appropriate, again, within those bumpers that you talked about, but know that there's a process in place.
In the past, we were told specifically that, we do not know any other, or whether it's repeated or not. The faculty members would not even be informed or not privy to get that information because there's legal, reasons behind it. And then I know some of my colleagues were discouraged from reporting because, nothing happens, right? There's no one out there to catch the multiple, offenders, and that actually, one person reporting it doesn't mean anything. And even, different faculty members reporting the same student, and it doesn't end up with any, harsher or unnecessary, punishment. And so that actually discouraged, reporting. I think, it's good to know that now there is a system to catch up there.
That's what I think. It's easy to say that this is going to be a focal point of the revision of the policy. It will be multiple offenses and how that gets handled.
Absolutely.
There's a whole bunch of questions.
Okay. We'll go ahead with questions then.
We have students who took Chem, every single one of our teaching faculty for Chem 115. Okay, so one thing that we always feel kind of a little murky about is that, okay, that guy cheated in my class. Just saw him in your lab. Do I tell you or not? And my understanding has always been you probably don't want to go tell that faculty member that. But what if he noticed something suspicious and he or she is asking around?
We had an incident this semester.
Talk to me.
Where a student got an A in the class, and he was accused with his friend of cheating. They retook it together in the summer. One got an A, one got an F, and the A student re-enrolled in the class with the F student.
I've heard of this case. Haven't they had identical schedules the entire time they were here?
They have the identical schedule the entire time they've been working.
Isn't life such a tapestry
You know
of
how that
people?
happened?
Such a
Because
rich.
the faculty member came back to me and said, this guy, I know he got an A in my class. And we looked him up, and I'm like, and then we realized, because we had documented that he had been accused of cheating. They together had a UF in one course. But they are continuing, whether they pass or not, they're mirrored all the way through.
Call Azalea. All these weird ones. Call her.
But on the other hand, if you go back to your slides where it said there was 0 academic probation.
Mhm.
I mean, I know, because I've sat in these, the conduct board things, where the student says stuff that's like, oh yeah, I didn't know this was this, I didn't know that was cheating, whatever. And you have a group of faculty and students from completely different fields who are feeling really nice because whatever, and they're pretty laid back and they don't have the same standards we do, so they say, oh, the student gets off. I mean, I can tell you, I've sat in there for hours feeling like I was on trial for cases where 4 of my faculty all said, here are cases where the kid clearly cheated, right? I didn't teach English courses, I'm the assistant dean in this, right? But I'm there, and I'm telling you exactly what documentation is, in my mind, solid lock, and they're like, okay, so you leave, and then I found out later, nothing really happens. Kid goes back out. I'm like, why? I mean, this, so it's not that the college didn't prosecute.
Yes.
Or, I mean, academically, these kids have UFs, that's fine. But we were pushing for suspension, expulsion, and whatever. And my associate dean has done the same thing multiple times. It's still not happened, right? And I can tell you in Everly, their associate dean has sat through trying to get things, and sometimes it happens, but very rarely. So the process is flawed, because the kids know how to play it.
Absolutely.
They can sit there and cry. And then bleeding hearts will be like, oh, poor child, you're okay.
But we can look back
really
like
didn't
at their
know.
history and see, even though they haven't been charged, just like this student, we knew he was in there for one reason only.
Absolutely.
So you're seeing these patterns, and to go to the lengths that we go to figure out what is going on, it's very frustrating when you get to the point where you end up seeing that student sitting right back at you.
And one of the things that may have to happen is just more education for, whether it's at the appeal level or in the student conduct level, whoever is hearing those cases, the education along the lines of steeling yourself against the crying students, educating them that, yes, students come in and cry, and we'll give you all the reasons why this is going to wreck their life or how they didn't do this, but if we have evidence, we have to look at the evidence. And those hearing members, again, either at the appeal or the student conduct level, I'm not sure yet how that piece is going to come together, but I absolutely agree that if there's documented evidence, then a hearing panel doesn't need to be just overturning that based on a student's story of how it's going to affect their life or because they're feeling generous. I mean, I don't want to just, put the hammer down on everybody, but if there is clear and documented evidence, we have to respect that.
Okay, I coordinate CS 101, so
Okay.
a lot of these are my students. Unfortunately. We kind of have a 2-tiered penalty system for most of the violations. The first time, we normally knock them down on the assignment grade. Second time, we fail them for the course.
Okay.
If we have students who repeat the course, and this is across all of our sections, if we have students who repeat the course a second time, and we count a violation from the previous semester against them, we have not been up until now, but we kind of have that 2-tiered system, figuring that the first time they may not have entirely realized what was going on, even though we have it really explicitly listed multiple places what we do, but the second time, if it's
Course level policy?
yeah.
I'd say then you couldn't. Yeah.
But if you report the first time.
Yes,
But
if
then
they
there's-
officially
the second
report.
time, now it's in conduct.
Yes, so if you're just kind of,
But our level, we still just we reset every semester.
Yeah.
Okay.
If it's a course level policy, not a department level policy, then it would be treated at the course level, right? So if it's CS 101, then you reset every time that student comes back into CS 101.
Can you
Yes.
make it a course, can you make it a department
Sure, of course you
policy?
could.
Can we make a departmental level policy that is specific to CS 101?
No.
Okay.
That's still a course level.
Undergrads.
If I could get everybody else on board.
If you have like a situation in 10.1.15 where a student enrolls with, in our case, different level, up the next level with another instructor, oh, I see that student is in your class. That instructor from the previous level or previous course cannot inform the instructor about what happened in her class, or can they? Because at the moment, we have got this absolutely rigid, no information between classes. And I'm sure
I
it's
would-
going on informally, but not, especially not between sophomores.
So I'll speak from the provost's office here with my understanding of what the legal counsel would say, which is not to communicate that, right?
And that's what we've been fighting.
Yeah, is that it should be addressed fresh in every course. And that if they start having suspicions, if you and you want to ask those questions, there's now someone on campus to actually facilitate those questions and those conversations in a way that won't put your department at risk of not having the sanctions stick because you did something wacky, right? So if you want to have those conversations,
Yes.
she's the one to have those conversations with.
And it comes back down to faculty acting every time.
In their course.
Yes.
Yep. Dave, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Well, I just should note that those people who are objecting to the bleeding hearts on the hearing panels, I mean, that problem's been solved because we've done away with hearing panels. But my question was from the student's perspective on multiple offenses. As you say, the faculty members need to do what the faculty members need to do in their classrooms. So the students would at that point be contacted by you after the second offense, after the third offense? I mean, in other words, it seems, from a student's perspective, if they're multiply offending, is it a guarantee they'll get a letter from you after the second offense?
So my plan is that they will, this is again one of those policy and process questions that we're still working on, but I could see at a minimum every student getting what we have an investigation letter that we can send out to students through student conduct. I could at minimum see them getting one of those for them to come in and have a conversation with me so I could learn more from their accounting of what happened to see if they needed educational sanctions that would help them, not offend in the future. It would again be documented that student conduct had then stepped in, and there'd be another piece in that tracking of their behavior. So if they offended again, even if they didn't receive additional sanctions like suspension, there'd be another record. But yes, I mean, for me, the second offense, that is at least going to get them an investigation letter to come talk to me and figure out where we need to go from there. But it's just one of those policy and process pieces that we're still working out.
Right. It just complicates life, right? Because if the student is presumably continuing on in that course because they just got an assignment grade, which they still think they can pass it, but you note that it's the second offense and you're thinking about something more severe, you need to intervene with that student relatively quickly.
Yes.
Because they're continuing to work along and they shouldn't be, in a sense. Right?
Well,
So,
and that's where the sanctioning has to be talked about, because I think it's going to be, we're going to have to divide what course level sanctions are and what institutional level sanctions are. Because I don't, and one of the things we'll need to talk about is I don't think it'd be good practice if we are assigning UFs, for example, because that's a faculty sanction, that's a faculty grade, and I think it's going to have to be then additional sanctions that sit outside of course level.
Yes. And the other thing to consider is that I would not be going back, there's no kind of double jeopardy situation where a student's being charged again for either of the two violations that landed them in front of me. It's a separate charge if they are charged with something that deals with the behavioral pattern. It's in the student code. I forget what the clause is, but there's a section that says if you have repeated or aggravated violations of any of these sections in the code, you may be charged. And so it's not that I'd be going back and saying, well, let's look at this particular incident and see if you need a more severe classroom sanction. It would be, you've violated the policy twice. That means that there may be additional behavioral sanctions that come from student conduct. So I do agree that it has to be a timely process, because if suspension is on the table and it's the middle of the semester, then we need to move quickly so that the student can get their things in order if they are suspended or if it goes to a hearing. But, and this is something I've had to explain to students already, and that is difficult for them to understand with the way the policies currently are, is again that this is not student conduct going back and looking at those cases. It's a separate piece. And so that's just one of those process issues that, in terms of explaining it.
I don't want to drag this out, but it is going to be a mess, because especially if the faculty are reporting violations and the students are disagreeing with them, then in a sense student conduct does have to revisit those previous sanctions, because faculty members can report all they want and can assign course grades as they want, but if the students are going to say, hey, I actually didn't do that, then you're stuck in a he said, she said kind of an environment where you're going to have to adjudicate the issues of whether they were actually cheating or not.
And we're looking at the appeals process as well. Maybe making that a more timely process would be a helpful piece in that, because some of the issue is that these cases go through multiple levels of appeal already. But at the end of the day, I mean, if the student has by default accepted the charge by not responding or appealing, you know, they have, even if they don't agree with it, they have by default been held responsible. And so at that point, once a student has accepted responsibility, either intentionally or not, for something, then student conduct can step in and say, okay, there's now a pattern of behavior that you are responsible for according to our current policies. So it is a messy process. I
We're
will
just a touch
absolutely
long,
agree.
so I'm going to let a natural pause happen and anybody can excuse themselves who would like to.